Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're untangling a pretty wild reality, the hidden complexities of modern space infrastructure and global security. We usually think of space as this distant, untouchable frontier, right? But the truth is, the invisible threads that literally hold our modern world together are dangling right above our heads. And honestly, they are incredibly vulnerable. Let's get into it. Let's start with this massive number, 14,904. That's the staggering number of satellites orbiting us as of 2026. To put that in perspective, that is a 31.5% jump just since 2023. We are throwing hardware into orbit at an absolutely historic pace to build out a multi-billion-dollar space economy. But here's the catch. With every single launch, the attack surface for bad actors expands exponentially. And that brings us to the core shift in how we have to think about space security today. Think about it from an adversary's perspective. They don't care whose name is legally on the side of the satellite. They only care about what it actually does. If a private company's satellite is feeding positioning data to a military unit in a conflict zone, well, to an adversary, that's a military asset. The old boundary between a commercial gadget and a military tool has completely vanished. So, here's our game plan for This Explainer. We're going to hit the Viasat precedent, break down the three-layer attack surface, look at the commercial dependency paradox, dive into advanced threats and AIOI, and finally figure out how to fix the governance gap. All right, Section 1, the Viasat precedent. Let's go back to the morning of February 24th, 2022. A massive cyber attack hits Viasat, a commercial satellite communications provider. Now, the immediate goal here was to disrupt military command and control, but because this was a commercial network, the collateral damage was off the charts. It knocked tens of thousands of European modems offline, disrupting civilian emergency services and literally shutting down wind farm operations. This attack, which was attributed to Russian military intelligence, proved a terrifying concept. You don't actually need expensive kinetic missiles to cripple a military. You just have to hack the commercial tech they happen to rely on. Moving on to Section 2, the three-layer attack surface. When we say space attack, it's easy to picture, Star Wars, right? Lasers and explosions in orbit. But the actual attack surface is made up of these three highly interdependent layers. First, you have the ground segment. We're talking control centers and render supply chains right here on Earth. Compromising this is usually the easiest way to hijack a space asset, because it connects to standard, hackable internet networks. Second is the link segment, the radio frequencies bouncing between the ground and space. And third is the space segment itself, the actual satellites, which are getting way more vulnerable because they're increasingly software-defined and updated remotely. Let's look at how attacking that middle layer, the link segment, can cause massive real-world chaos. Take spoofing. By transmitting counterfeit signals that basically mimic legitimate satellites, hackers can force receivers to calculate completely false positions. Think about what that means. Malicious actors can misdirect commercial aircraft mid-flight or mess with the precise time synchronization that our entire global financial system depends on. And they can do all of this without physically touching a single satellite in orbit. They just need a powerful transmitter on the ground. But we've also got a vulnerability that totally flies under the radar, the insider threat. Because today's satellites are so software-driven, they rely on these wildly fragmented global supply chains. A single satellite is slapped together with hardware and code from literally thousands of different vendors. An unverified vendor or just a malicious insider anywhere in that chain, from the physical manufacturing to the software development, holds the keys to the kingdom. They can access the architecture before the satellite even makes it to the launch pad. Which brings us to Section 3, the commercial dependency paradox. I really want you to consider the sheer scale of our vulnerability here. Over 70% of NATO's satellite communications currently rely on private commercial operators. We're talking about the critical positioning data that guides precision munitions, the systems coordinating allied forces. The vast majority of it flows through constellations owned by private companies, not dedicated hardened military networks. And right here is the paradox. Commercial companies operate on market standards, right? They prioritize rapid deployment. They want low costs. But military requirements demand hardened, mission-critical security and super expensive encryption. Since they historically haven't had to, commercial operators just haven't built in those costly security features. So we end up relying heavily on budget-friendly, commercial-speed infrastructure to perform highly sensitive military functions. It's a massive security mismatch. Okay, let's jump to Section 4, Advanced Threats and AI.
5. That's the exact number of advanced persistent threat groups. These are highly sophisticated, state-sponsored hacking organizations that researchers have documented actively targeting this vulnerable infrastructure right now. They're successfully exploiting legacy protocols and unpatched software in ground systems, and they're getting smarter about it every single day. I cannot stress this enough. This isn't some theoretical future threat. It is an active, ongoing campaign.
And the weapons they're using? They're evolving way faster than our defenses. Look at prompt lock, which was identified in 2025. This is dynamic, AI-driven malware that can literally change its form on the fly just to evade detection. We're rapidly hitting that exact horizon intelligence agencies have been sounding the alarm about for years, a battle space where offensive AI malware is duking it out with defensive AI systems directly over our critical commercial networks. So what do we do about it? Let's look at Section 5, Fixing the Governance Gap.
The fundamental issue we're facing is our dangerously outdated rulebook. The primary international framework we lean on is the Outer Space Treaty. It was written in 1967. It was designed for a world where only giant governments went to space, competing in a Cold War with physical, kinetic weapons. Our 2026 reality is entirely different. Today, private commercial domains rule the sky. We're dealing with hybrid actors, and the weapons of choice are digital cyber operations. A 1967 treaty just cannot govern a world where wars are fought with malicious code targeting private infrastructure. When we look at the timeline of recent events, it's clear our institutional responses are really struggling to keep pace with the speed of these hybrid threats. Yes, in 2021, NATO recognized that space attacks could trigger Article 5, and in 2026, the Space Force established cyber squadrons to protect launches. But protecting a launch is one specific event. Protecting thousands of commercial satellites operating every second of every day against AI-driven threats, that requires a totally different level of governance that, frankly, we just don't have yet.
So take a breath and think about this question for a second. How exactly do we protect an ungoverned frontier? Because if we want to prevent a catastrophic failure of the systems we use literally every single day, we need a massive overhaul of how we view space. It can no longer just be a military problem, and it can't just be a corporate problem. To fix this, experts are proposing a strict 3-level approach. Technically, we absolutely must enforce layered encryption and security by design across the board. Institutionally, we have to align commercial contracts with military security standards. Honestly, it's simple. If a commercial satellite does military work, it needs military-grade security. And internationally, we desperately need to extend UN cyber norms to cover commercial space assets, so there are actual geopolitical consequences for whoever attacks them. And the good news is, there is an actionable starting point available right now. The NIST Cybersecurity Framework Profile for Hybrid Satellite Networks provides a highly developed roadmap for protecting both those vulnerable ground stations and the communication links. Integrating frameworks like this into every commercial defense contract, it's no longer optional. It is the absolute baseline for survival. It can't just be a polite suggestion anymore. It has to be a mandatory requirement. Which leaves us with this final, critical thought. As we rely more than ever on these invisible threats in the sky, for our navigation, our communication, our global security, we have to ask ourselves, when that commercial infrastructure inevitably falls to a cyber attack, who ultimately bears the cost of the global fallout? Are we truly prepared to defend the commercial tech that sustains our modern world? Or are we just waiting for the next system to go dark? Thanks for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.